7. But here are miracles, my lord. From a Ukrainian comedy. A strange incident had taken place at the fair. There were rumors all over the place that the red jacket had been seen somewhere among the wares. An old bread woman fancied she saw the devil in the shape of a pig bending over the wagons as though looking for something. The news soon flew to every corner of the now quiet camp, and everyone would have thought it a crime to disbelieve it, in spite of the fact that the old woman, whose stall was next to the drinking booth, had been helping herself to her neighbor's goods and could not walk straight. To this was added the story, by now greatly exaggerated, of the marvel seen by the district clerk in the tumble-down barn. So, as night was falling, people huddled together, their peace of mind was destroyed, and everyone was too terrified to close an eye, while the less hardy ones who had secured a night's lodging in some cottage or other made their way homewards. Among the latter were Cherovik with his daughter and his friend Sibylla, and they, together with their friends who had offered to keep them company, were responsible for the loud knocking that had so alarmed Kivria. Sibylla was already a little tipsy. He had twice driven round the cottage before he could find it. His guests, too, were all rather merry, and they unceremoniously pushed into the cottage before their host. Cherovik's wife sat as though on needles when they began rummaging in every corner of the cottage. "What's wrong?" asked Sibylla as he entered. "Are you shaking with fever?" "Yes, I am not well," answered Kivria, stealing an uneasy glance upwards. "Come, wife, get the bottle out of the wagon," said Sibylla. "We will empty it with these good folk, for those damned women have given us such a scare that one is ashamed to own it." "Yes, mates, there was really no sense in our coming here," he went on, taking a pull at an earthenware jug. "I bet you a new cap that the women thought they would have a laugh at us." "Even if it was Satan, who's Satan?" "Spit on him." "If he stood here before me this very minute, I'd make a long nose at him, damn me if I wouldn't." "Why did you turn so pale, then?" cried one of the visitors. He was a head taller than any of the rest, and he always tried to behave like a courageous man. "Me? You must have been dreaming." The visitors laughed. The boastful hero smiled complacently. "As if he could turn pale now," put in another. "His cheeks are as red as a poppy. He is not a Sibylla now, but a beetroot, or, rather, the red jacket himself that frightened all folks so." As the bottle went the round of the table, the spirits of the visitors rose. Cherovik, still worrying about the red jacket who would not let his inquisitive mind rest, appealed to his friend. "Come, mate, tell me. I keep asking about this cursed jacket and can't get a straight answer from anyone." "It's not a thing to talk about just before nightfall. However, to satisfy you and these good friends here who want, I see, to know about these strange doings as much as you do, I'll tell you." "So listen." Here Sibylla scratched his shoulders, mopped his face with the skirt of his coat, leaned both arms on the table, and began. "Once upon a time a devil was kicked out of hell. What for, God only knows. But how?" Cherovik interrupted. "How could it come about that a devil was turned out of hell?" "I don't know, mate, but turned out he was, just as a man turns a dog out of his house." "Perhaps it came over him to do a good deed, and so they showed him the door." "And the poor devil was so homesick for hell that he was ready to hang himself." "Well, there was nothing for it. In his trouble he took to drink. He settled in that tumble-down barn you have seen at the foot of the hill, a place no good man will pass now without making the sign of the cross, and this devil became such a rake you would not fit another like him among the lads. He Saturday all day long in the pot house." At this point the severe Cherovik interrupted again. "What's this you are saying? How could anyone let a devil into a pot house?" "God bless us all, he's got claws and horns, hasn't he?" Ah, that was just it, he had a cap and gloves on. Who could recognize him? Well, he kept it up till he drank away all he had with him. They gave him credit for a long time, but at last they would give no more. The devil had to pawn his red jacket for less than a third of its value to the Jew who sold vodka in those days at Sorokinsky Fair. He pawned it and said to him, "Mind now, Jew, I shall come to you for my jacket in a year's time, take care of it." And he disappeared and no more was seen of him. The Jew examined the coat thoroughly, the cloth was better than anything you could get even in Mirgorod, and the red of it glowed like fire, so that you couldn't take your eyes off it. And it seemed to the Jew a long time to wait till the end of the year. So he scratched his head and at last made up his mind to sell the jacket. He got nearly 50 rubles for it from a gentleman who was passing by. The Jew forgot all about the date fixed. But one evening a man turns up. "Come, Jew, hand me over my jacket." At first the Jew did not recognize him, but when he had had a good look at him he pretended he had never seen him before. "What jacket? I have no jacket." "I know nothing about your jacket." The other walked away. Towards nightfall the Jew locked himself up in his room, counted the money in his chests, flung a sheet round his shoulders, and began saying his prayers in Jewish fashion. All at once he heard a rustle and looked up. There were pigs' snouts poking in at every window. At that moment an indistinct sound not unlike the grunt of a pig was heard. Everyone went pale. Drops of sweat stood out on Sibylia's face. "What was it?" cried Cherovik, frightened. "Nothing," answered Sibylia, trembling all over. Responded one of the guests. "Did you say something?" "No." "Who was it grunted?" "God knows why we are in such a fluster." "There's nobody but us here." They looked about fearfully and began rummaging in the corners. Kivria was more dead than alive. You are a set of women, that's what you are, she brought out aloud. Call yourselves Cossacks. Why, you ought to sit spinning and heckling yarn. Maybe someone's bench creaked, and you're all in a fluster like a bunch of madmen. This put our heroes to shame and made them pull themselves together. Sibylla took a pull at the jug and went on with his story. The Jew fainted with terror, but the pigs with legs as long as stilts climbed in at the windows and revived him in a trice with plaited thongs, making him skip higher than these rafters. The Jew fell at their feet and confessed everything. Only the jacket could not be restored in a hurry. The gentleman had been robbed of it on the road by a gypsy who sold it to a woman, and she brought it back again to the fair at Sorokinsky, but no one would buy anything from her after that. The woman wondered and wondered, and at last she saw what was wrong. There was no doubt the red jacket was at the bottom of it. It was not for nothing that she had felt stifled when she put it on. Without stopping to think, she flung it in the fire, but the devilish thing wouldn't burn. That's a gift from the devil, she thought. She managed to thrust it into the wagon of a peasant who had come to the fair to sell his butter. The silly fellow was delighted, only, no one would ask for his butter. An evil hand must have foisted that red jacket on me. He took his axe and chopped it into bits. He looked at it, and each bit joined up to the next till the jacket was whole again. Crossing himself, he went at it with the axe again. He threw the pieces about all over the place and went away. Ever since then, at the time of the fair, the devil walks all over the marketplace with the face of a pig, grunting and collecting the scraps of his jacket. Now they say there is only the left sleeve missing. Folks have fought shy of the place ever since, and it is 10 years since the fair has been held on it. But in an evil hour the assessor, The rest of the sentence froze on the speaker's lips. There was a loud rattle at the window, the panes fell thinking on the floor, and a pig's face, terrible to look upon, stared in at the window, rolling its eyes as though asking, "What are you doing here, good people?" Eight. His tail between his legs like a dog. Like Cain, he trembled all over. The blood dripped from his nose. Kotlyarevsky, the Aeneid. Everyone in the room was numb with horror. Sibylia Saturday petrified with his mouth open, his eyes were almost popping out of his head like bullets, his outspread fingers stayed motionless in the air. In overwhelming terror the valiant giant leapt up and struck his head against the rafter, the board shifted, and with a thud and a crash the priest's son fell to the floor. "Oh, oh, oh!" one of the party screamed desperately, flopping on a bench in alarm, his arms and legs waving. "Help!" yelled another, hiding his head under a sheepskin. Sibylia, roused from his stupefaction by this second horror, crept shuddering under his wife's skirts. The valiant giant climbed into the oven, although the opening was narrow, and closed the oven door on himself. And Cherovik clapped a pot on his head instead of a cap, dashed to the door like a scalded cat, and ran through the streets in a frenzy. Only weariness caused him to slacken his pace. His heart was thumping like an oil press, streams of perspiration rolled down him. He was on the point of sinking to the ground in exhaustion when suddenly he heard someone running after him. His breath failed him. "The devil! The devil!" he cried frantically, redoubling his efforts, and a minute later he fell unconscious on the ground. "The devil! The devil!" came a shout behind him, and all he felt was something falling with a thud on top of him. His senses deserted him and he lay dumb and motionless in the middle of the road, like a corpse stretched out in his narrow coffin. IX. In front, like anyone else; behind, upon my soul, like a devil. From a folk tale. One of the crowd that had settled down for the night in the open air Saturday up suddenly. "Did you hear that, Blas?" he said. "Someone here spoke about the devil." "What is that to me?" a gypsy near him grumbled, stretching himself. "They may talk of all the devils in hell for all I care." But he bawled as if he was being strangled. "A man will cry out anything in his sleep." "Maybe, but we must have a look at least." "Strike a light." The other gypsy, grumbling to himself, rose to his feet, sent a shower of sparks flying like lightning flashes, blew on the tinder, and with a kaganes in his hands, the usual Ukrainian lamp consisting of a broken crock full of mutton fat, set off, lighting the way before him. "Stop. There is something lying here." "Show a light this way." They were joined by several others. "What is it, Blas?" "Looks like two men, one on top of the other." "I can't make out yet which of them is the devil." "Why, who is on top?" "A woman." "Well, there you are, that's the devil." A general burst of laughter roused almost the whole street. "A woman astride of a man." "She knows how to ride, I dare say," one of the bystanders exclaimed. "Look, lads," said another, picking up a broken piece of the pot of which only one half still remained on Cherevik's head. "What a cap this fine fellow put on." The growing noise and laughter brought out corpses to life. Cherevik and his spouse, full of the panic they had passed through, stared in terror at the swarthy faces of the gypsies. In the dim and flickering light they looked like a wild horde of gnomes bathed in the heavy fumes of the underworld, in the darkness of perpetual night. X. Fire upon you, out upon you, image of Satan. From a Ukrainian comedy. The freshness of morning breathed over the awakening folk of Sorokintsy. Clouds of smoke from all the chimneys floated to meet the rising sun. The fair began to hum with life. Sheep were bleating, horses neighing, the cackle of geese and market women sounded all over the encampment again, and terrible tales of the red jacket, which had roused such alarm in the mysterious hours of darkness, vanished with the return of morning. Stretching and yawning drowsily, Cherovik lay in the thatched barn of his friend Sibylla, among oxen and sacks of flour and wheat. Apparently he had no desire to part with his dreams, but a voice broke in upon him, a voice as familiar as his own stove, the blessed refuge of his lazy hours, or as the pot-house kept by his cousin not 10 paces from his own door. Get up," his tender spouse squeaked in his ear, tugging at his arm with all her might. Cherovik, instead of answering, blew out his cheeks and began waving his arms, as though beating a drum. "Crazy fool," she shouted, dodging his arms, which almost struck her in the face. Cherovik Saturday up, rubbed his eyes and looked about him. "The devil take me, my dear, if I didn't fancy your face was a drum and I was forced to beat a tattoo on it like a Muscovite soldier, by those pig faces that Sibylla was telling us about." "Stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and take the mare to market." "We are just a laughing stock. We've come to the fair and not sold a handful of hemp." "That's true," Cherovik assented, "they will laugh at us now, to be sure." Get along, get along. They are laughing at you already." "But I haven't washed yet," Cherovik went on, yawning and scratching his back as he tried to gain time. "What a time to be fussy about being clean. When have you cared about that? Here's a towel, wipe your ugly face." She snatched up something that lay crumpled up, and threw it down aghast. It was the cuff of the red jacket. "Go along and get to work," she repeated, recovering herself, on seeing that her husband was motionless with terror and his teeth were chattering. "A fine sale there will be now," he muttered to himself as he untied the mare and led her to the marketplace. It was not for nothing that, while I was getting ready for this cursed fair, my heart was as heavy as if someone had put a dead cow on my back, and twice the oxen tried to turn homewards. And now I come to think of it, I believe it was Monday when we started. And so everything has gone wrong. And the cursed devil is so restless. You'd think he might wear his jacket with one sleeve missing, but no, he can't leave honest folk alone. Now if I were the devil, God forbid, do you suppose I'd go hunting about at night for a lot of damned rags? Here Cherevik's meditations were interrupted by a thick harsh voice. Before him stood a tall gypsy. "What have you for sale, good man?" Cherevik was silent for a moment. He looked at the gypsy from head to foot and said with unruffled composure, neither stopping nor letting go the bridle, "You can see for yourself what I am selling." "Harness," said the gypsy, looking at the bridle which the other had in his hand. "Yes, harness, if a mare is like harness." "One would think you had fed her on straw, neighbor." "Straw." Here Cherevik would have pulled at the bridle to lead his mare forward and convict the shameless slanderer of his lie, but his hand moved with extraordinary ease and struck his own chin. He looked, in it was a severed bridle, and tied to the bridle, oh horror! His hair stood up on his head, a piece of a red sleeve. Spitting, crossing himself and brandishing his arms, he ran away from the unexpected gift faster than a man half his age, and vanished in the crowd. For my own wheat I have been beaten. Proverb. Catch him! Catch him! Cried several lads at the narrow end of the street, and Cherevik felt himself suddenly seized by stalwart hands. Bind him! That's the fellow who stole an honest man's mare. God bless you. What are you binding me for? Fancy his asking. What did you want to steal a mare for from the peasant Cherevik? You're out of your wits, lads. Who has ever heard of a man robbing himself? That's an old trick. An old trick. Why were you running your hardest, as though the devil himself were on your heels? Anyone would run when the devil's garment. Try that on others, my good soul. You'll catch it yet from the assessor, to teach you to go scaring people with tales of the devil. Catch him! Catch him! Came a shout from the other end of the street. There he is. That's him. And Cherovik beheld his friend Sibylla in the most pitiful plight, with his hands tied behind him, led along by several lads. "Queer things are happening here," said one of them. "You should hear what this swindler says." "You have only to look at his face to see he is a thief." When we asked him why he was running like a madman, he says he put his hand in his pocket and instead of his snuffbox pulled out a bit of the devil's jacket and it burst into a red flame, and he took to his heels. Ha! Two birds of a feather. We had better tie them together. 12. In what am I to blame, good folks? Why are you torturing me, said our poor wretch. Why are you abusing me? What for, he said, bursting into tears. Streams of bitter tears, and clutching at his sides. Artemovsky Gulak, master and dog. Maybe you really have pinched something, mate. Cherovik asked, as he lay bound beside Sibylla in a thatched shanty. You too, mate. May my arms and legs wither if I ever stole anything in my life, except maybe dumplings with cream from my mother, and that only before I was 10 years old. Why has this trouble come upon us, mate? It's not so bad for you, you were only charged with stealing from somebody else, but what have I, unlucky wretch, done to deserve such a foul slander as stealing my mare from myself? It seems, mate, it was written at our birth that we should have no luck. Woe to us, forlorn and forsaken. At this point the two friends burst out sobbing. "What's the matter with you, Solopi?" sajd Gritsko, entering. "Who tied you up like that?" "Ah, Golupapenko," cried Cherovik, delighted. "This is the lad I was telling you about, mate." "God strike me dead on the spot if he did not toss off a whole jug, almost as big as your head, and never turn a hair." "What made you put a slight on such a fine lad, then?" "It seems," Cherovik went on, addressing Gritsko, "God has punished me for having wronged you. Forgive me, good lad." "Upon my soul, I'd be glad to do anything for you." "But what would you have me do? There's the devil in my old woman." "I am not one to remember evil, Solopi." "If you like, I'll set you free." Here he winked to the other lads, and the very ones who had been guarding them rushed up to untie them. "But you must do your part, too, a wedding." "And let us keep it up so that our legs ache with dancing for a year afterwards." "Good, good," said Cherovik, striking his hands together. "I feel as pleased as though the Muscovites had carried off my old woman." "Why give it another thought? Whether it's right or wrong, the wedding shall be today, and that's all about it." "Mind now, Solopi, in an hour's time I will be with you." "Now go home, there you will find people who want to buy your mare and your wheat." "What? Has the mare been found?" "Yes." Cherovik was struck dumb with joy and stood still, gazing after Gritsko. "Well, Gritsko, you can't say I've bungled the job," said the tall gypsy to the hurrying lad. "The oxen are mine now, aren't they?" "Yes." 13. Fear not, darling. Put on your red boots. Trample your voice underfoot, so that your iron-shod heels may clang. So that your foes may be hushed and still. A wedding song. Pariska mused sitting alone in the cottage with her pretty chin propped on her hand. Many dreams hovered about her fair head. At times a faint smile touched her crimson lips and some joyful feeling lifted her dark brows, then a cloud of pensiveness would set them frowning above her clear brown eyes. But what if it does not come true as he said, she whispered with an expression of doubt. What they don't let me marry him? What if, no, no, that cannot be. My stepmother does as she likes, why mayn't I do as I like? I've plenty of obstinacy too. How handsome he is. How wonderfully black eyes glow. How delightfully he says, Pariska, darling. How his white jacket suits him. His belt ought to be a bit brighter, though. I will weave him one when we settle in a new cottage. I can't help being pleased when I think, she went on, taking from her bosom a little red paper-framed looking-glass bought at the fair and gazing into it with secret pleasure, how I shall meet her one day somewhere, she may burst before I bow to her. Yes, stepmother, you've beaten your stepdaughter enough. Not until the rock grows flowers and the oak bends down to the water like a willow shall I bow before you. But I was forgetting, I want to try on a married woman's cap, even it has to be my stepmother's, and see how it suits me. She got up, holding the looking-glass in her hand and bending her head down to it, walked gingerly about the room, as though in dread of falling, seeing below her, instead of the floor, the ceiling with the boards laid on the rafters, from which the priest's son had so lately dropped, and the shelves set with pots. Why, I am like a child, she cried laughing, afraid to take a step. And she began tapping with her feet, growing bolder as she went on. At last she laid her left hand on her hip and went off into a dance, clinking with her metalled heels, holding the looking-glass before her and singing her favorite song. Little green periwinkle. Twine lower to me. And you, black-browed dear one. Come nearer to me. Little green periwinkle. Twine still lower to me. And you, black-browed dear one. Come nearer still to me. At that moment Cherovik peeped in at the door, and seeing his daughter dancing before the looking-glass, he stood still. For a long time he looked on, laughing at this unusual prank of his daughter, who was apparently so absorbed that she noticed nothing, but when he heard the familiar strains of the song, his blood tingled, he stepped forward, his arms jauntily akimbo, and forgetting all he had to do, set to dancing. A loud shout of laughter from his friend Sibylla startled both of them. Here is a pretty thing. The dad and his daughter getting up a wedding on their own account. Make haste and come along, the bridegroom has arrived. At the last words, Pariska flushed a deeper crimson than the ribbon which bound her head, and her light-hearted parent remembered his errand. Well, daughter, let us hurry up. Kivria so pleased that I have sold the mare, he went on, looking timidly about him, that she has run off to buy herself skirts and all sorts of rags, so we must get it all over before she is back. Pariska had no sooner stepped over the threshold than she felt herself caught in the arms of the lad in the white jacket, who with a crowd of people was waiting for her outside. God bless you, said Cherovik, joining their hands. May your lives together cleave as the flowers in the wreaths. At this point a hubbub was heard in the crowd. I burst before I'd allow it, screamed Cherovik's helpmate, who was being shoved back by the laughing crowd. Don't get excited, woman, Cherovik said coolly, seeing that two sturdy gypsies had caught hold of her hands. What is done can't be undone, I don't like going back on my word. No, no, that shall never be, screamed Kivria, but no one heeded her. Several couples surrounded the happy pair and formed an impenetrable dancing wall around them. A strange, ineffable feeling would have overcome anyone who saw the whole crowd transformed into a scene of unity and harmony at one stroke of the bow of the fiddler, who had long twisted moustaches and wore a homespun jacket. Men whose sullen faces seemed never to have known the gleam of a smile were tapping with their feet and wriggling their shoulders, everyone was whirling and dancing. But an even stranger and more unaccountable feeling would have been stirred in the heart at the sight of old women, whose ancient faces breathed the indifference of the tomb, pushing their way between the young, laughing, living human beings. Nothing but drink, like a mechanic operating a lifeless automaton, made them perform actions that seemed human, caring for nothing, without the joy of youth, without a spark of sympathy. They slowly wagged their drunken heads, dancing after the rejoicing crowd, without so much as glancing at the young couple. The sounds of laughter and song and uproar grew fainter and fainter. The strains of the fiddle were lost in vague and feeble notes, and died away in the void. In the distance there was still the sound of tapping feet, something like the far-away murmur of the sea, and soon all was silence and emptiness. Is it not thus that joy, lovely and inconstant guest, flies from us? In vain the last solitary note tries to express gaiety. In its own echo it hears melancholy and emptiness, and listens to it, bewildered. Is it not thus that those who have been sportive friends in free and stormy youth are lost one by one the wide world, and leave their old comrade lonely and forlorn? Sad is the lot of one left behind. Heavy and sorrowful is his heart, and nothing can help him.